this computer. All right, so Pitt-Virginia Tech, Heinz Field, 4 o'clock kickoff this Saturday, and we're joined by Tim Sullivan from HokieHaven.com. And Tim, I mean, first thing on everyone's mind, the first question we always have to ask is, you know, what's the COVID situation right now? We're taping this on Thursday afternoon. We should say that because things change. We could get done taping and 15 minutes later the game could be canceled. So because Pitt's game against Georgia Tech last week got postponed late Thursday afternoon. So that's very much a possibility here. But I mean, as we stand here early afternoon on Thursday, what's Virginia Tech's situation as far as COVID? What do you know?
Yeah, for the most part, they feel like they've gotten out of the woods. They had, upwards of 20 guys missing the first couple weeks. It kind of tailed off ever since that. Now they're in the range of 2 or 3 to COVID each week. They have a couple other kind of, traditional injuries, which it kind of sounds like a mean-spirited way to say it. But from a COVID perspective, they feel like they're through the woods. And some of that is because a lot of players on the team have already had it. And the ACC's 90-day protocol means they don't have to be tested as regularly once they are fully recovered and all those sorts of things. So for the time being, they feel pretty good that they aren't going to have any significant absences going forward with it.
It's funny because I remember over the summer, June, July, there were these like flare-ups at places like, I feel like Texas had some, I think Clemson had some. And I mean, there were definitely sort of whispers, behind closed doors about, not suggesting that those coaches got their teams infected on purpose. But I mean, if you look at it now where teams are having games canceled, they're missing key players, it's incredibly cynical to think about it, but it's, maybe wouldn't have been the worst strategy.
Well, that's something
I'm going to hell for saying that, but
that's something that Justin Fuente has mentioned. Obviously they didn't do it intentionally, but he kind of says like, it sucked while we were going through it, but now we're almost grateful because it was going to happen sooner or later. You might as well get it out of the way so that once you get into the thick of a season, you really don't have to worry about it nearly as much.
Right. So what's the book on this Virginia Tech team? I mean, they're sitting at 4-4. A couple of wins that when you compare Pitt's schedule, Pitt's at 4-4 also, and you compare their schedules. Pitt has the losses to Boston College and NC State. Virginia Tech has those wins, which look a little better. But what's your kind of overall take on this team? At this point in the season.
Yeah, it's one that's really inconsistent. Obviously, NC State and Boston College have turned out to be, I think, better teams than Virginia Tech fans thought because of how easily the Hokies handled both of those teams. But then you look at it and you see a loss to Liberty, which, yes, they're a top 25 team, but I think that's more a reflection on their record than what they've accomplished against the opponents that they've accomplished it against. And you look at a game like North Carolina where the Hokies played really poorly for a quarter and then played really well but couldn't come all the way back. It's been a matter of you don't know what you're going to get, not only week to week, but kind of even on a down-to-down basis. And that's something that the staff has really been struggling to find, that type of consistency. I think more than quality in their team, consistency is what they've really been seeking this year. Obviously, like we were just talking about early in the season when they had a ton of COVID absences, that really kind of set them back in terms of preparing to be a little bit more consistent because they didn't know who they were going to have on a week-to-week basis. And they couldn't prepare the right guys on a week-to-week basis as well. They're hopefully thinking that they're through that part of it because they do know for the most part that they're going to be pretty healthy from a virus perspective. And the question just becomes, can we kind of level off some of the highs and some of the lows a little bit and be a team that you know what you're going to get more regularly?
You mentioned that Liberty game. I wanted to ask about that. I mean, is it just was all the angst directed at Justin Fuente after that one? Is that kind of where the fans took out their anger on that game?
For a big portion of it, for sure. And I think some of that is because there were a couple like really, really crucial head coach, clock mismanagement situations, including at the end of regulation. They thought they'd blocked a field goal and returned it for the game-winning touchdown. Instead, they had called the timeout, and Liberty was able to run one more play and then kick a field goal for the win. They ran out of time with a timeout in their pocket at the end of the first half and had to kick a field goal instead of getting a touchdown. Obviously, in a game that you lose by 3 points, those extra 4 points would have been very nice. So obviously, no individual is solely responsible for any result. But when fans have looked at that one, especially I think because I don't know if disillusioned is the right word, but fans definitely aren't hopping onto the Justin Fuente bandwagon already. That kind of colors how you look at a loss in a situation that you feel that fans are going to feel like they shouldn't have lost too. So I guess a little bit of piling on in that situation has happened too.
What's the overall, I guess, vibe on Fuente when you look at like the HokieHaven message boards and
Oh
things like
yeah.
that? It's year 5 now. I mean, you're starting to you have a sample size. You know what I mean? There's an
Yeah.
adequate sample size to start judging guys. What's the overall kind of feel on him?
I would say coming into this year, the thought was it needs to be a really big year or fans are really going to start jumping off board. And we've seen that it has not been the type of year that fans expected from the loss to Liberty. I think the loss to North Carolina is one that fans feel like they didn't really get a fair chance to win. And, those are decisions that come down to the head coach. So it's not the type of year that fans were expecting. And it's for reasons that I think can be traced most specifically to the head coach and not just the program that he's built, but to the decisions that he makes on a week-to-week basis. And that's something that has really disillusioned a lot of people, especially in the last few weeks. That's something that's it's not fun times if you're a real positive sort of guy on the message boards lately.
Yeah, I as the moderator of a Pitt message board in year 6 of Pat Narduzzi, when he's got those losses to Boston College and NC State, and they got blown out by 42 points against Notre Dame, I can kind of relate a little bit. I know how those things tend to go. Looking at this Virginia Tech team, though, with this, the running game, I mean, obviously is the strength of the offense. Have they run into games this year, though, where the running game's been shut down? And in those situations, have they been able to turn to the passing game? Maybe not even for a whole game, but for crucial stretches, have they been able to turn to the passing game and get success out of that side of it?
Yeah, I would say the last couple of games have been issues for the running game, and that's for different reasons. Khalil Herbert, who's their star running back, missed almost the entire game against Liberty. He returned the opening kickoff, tweaked a hamstring, and never set foot back between the lines. They had difficulty running the ball without him. It's still, the numbers weren't particularly bad, but this past weekend against Miami, obviously the Canes are a very different question from a talent perspective, and their front seven was really able to shut the Hokies down. Again, Herbert wasn't fully back to strength, so there are some, I guess, caveats that you could put into place, but when the game is put on the shoulders of Hendon Hooker, the quarterback, he does a pretty good job, but you can kind of tell that there are times when he feels like he needs to press, and you see, not consistently, but you see regularly some of the key mistakes of a guy who feels like he needs to make a play and is kind of over forcing it a little bit. When he can move the ball on the ground, which is a big piece of kind of helps them overcome some potential weakness at the running back position if Herbert's not available. But when they're in third and medium, third and long situations, I think fans are starting to get to a point where they're kind of clutching their fists and being like, uh-oh, let's kind of hope that we get through this down here.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned Hooker rushing too. He's the second leading rusher on the team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, watching it game to game, is that a lot of designed runs? Is he doing that sort of scrambling and improvising? How is he getting all those rushing yards?
Yeah, very little scrambling actually, which is kind of surprising because that was what he did a lot of last year. It's largely designed runs, largely option plays, whether that's read option plays or like even speed option. They like to run with him a lot to get him to the edge a little bit. So it's mostly designed run plays. And for whatever reason, he does not seem to be as comfortable scrambling this year. He has done it a few times and he's done it productively a few times, but I think the Hokies sacks against numbers would indicate that he's getting caught in the pocket a little bit more when the pressure comes on a passing down for sure.
Right. Has Herbert been a surprise? I mean, what did you expect him to do coming in as a transfer from Kansas?
Yeah, I think most people thought if this guy can't get on the field at Kansas, he's at best going to be a decent player. The issue wasn't that he couldn't get on the field in Kansas. It was that he wanted to go somewhere else where he could get a more productive set of tools around him to help him succeed. And I think he's exceeded any reasonable expectations, but the reasonable expectations were still pretty high for him. So that's something that it's been a pleasant surprise, but maybe not a massive surprise for fans for sure.
Well, he's got more rushing yards than Pitt's offense right now. So he's
I don't feel that's the highest bar to cross.
Yeah, it's not the passing or the rushing game has not been Pitt's strength this season. They've had to rely on the pass pretty considerably. I mean, along those lines, I mean, what can you tell us about Virginia Tech's defense? I mean, obviously a lot of the numbers look pretty solid to impressive in some areas. The pass is where Pitt's strength lies offensively. How are the Hokies against the pass?
It's an interesting question because the secondary is the one position group where they really haven't had that consistency yet. They had the virus issues early in the year, as is going to be a theme, I think, of basically every team. But they've also had one of their star cornerbacks, Jermaine Waller, has a wrist injury that has been keeping him in and out of the lineup inconsistently. So when they have a full complement of players, they've been pretty good. If any single individual is not in the lineup, though, it starts to get really iffy really quickly. And we've seen that North Carolina is going to do it to a lot of people, but they put up a ton of yards on this Hokies team. Liberty doesn't pass the ball a ton, but they pass very efficiently when they did pass a couple weeks ago. So a high quality passing game is something that I think really scares Hokie fans. The one caveat there would be they played really well against Miami for the first time from front to back on the defense. And the question becomes, is that they turned over a new leaf, or was it just a 1 week wonder? And obviously you never know until you get to week 2 of that and see what happens.
Right. I forget the numbers. Does Virginia Tech have many opt-outs, either before the season or during the season?
Yeah, they've had a few inconsequential ones, I guess, which is kind of rude to say since the season began. The big one would have been Caleb Farley, the cornerback who was projected as a first-round draft pick, opted out. I think he was the first player nationally to opt out from a Power 5 program. So that's obviously huge when you're talking about a pass game that doesn't have, or a pass defense that doesn't have depth at the cornerback position, especially. But other than him, the majority of them have been guys who are opting out because they plan to do playing time transfers after the year anyway, for the most part.
Okay, I gotcha. I guess it always just sort of seems from afar, and maybe fans of opposing teams take delight in this kind of thing and maybe make more out of it. But it seems like year after year, Virginia Tech, the off seasons are sort of tumultuous. It's there's transfers, the program's falling apart, everybody's bailing. It feels like there's 5 or 6 guys, maybe it's more, maybe it's less, every year who are transferring, at least for the past couple years. As you get closer to the program, does it feel maybe more stable than probably fans of Virginia or fans of Pitt or fans of North Carolina would like to think that it is in Blacksburg?
Yeah, a little bit more stable. Some of the transfers, especially the first few years of the Fuente era, were guys who were essentially dismissed from the team. They had been recruits under the previous coaching staff and had disciplinary issues. So those sorts of things are going to be kind of overlooked as fans from rivals want to say, oh, look at what's happening. These guys are leaving and we can't figure out why, sort of deal. But in recent years, the majority of the transfers have been playing time guys. Now there's obviously a couple, like the Farley situation looked worse from the exterior because of the history of guys leaving this program in recent years. Even if it was strictly a health related and a kind of a business decision that he made because he's going to be a first round draft pick, whether he played this year or not. But when you look at some of the other ones, their leading receiver from last year departed. You don't expect a guy like that to leave just because he wants a situation that he's happier in, and he transferred to Missouri. And I honestly have not even checked to see if Damon Hazelton is having a good year at Missouri. He did not get along with the coaching staff. There's always going to be some of those, even for productive players. But for the most part, I think a lot of it is maybe mutual decisions more than it appears from the outside.
Right. I guess when I look at this game on Saturday, then, Virginia Tech wants to run the ball constantly. That's the base of their offense. That's kind of what Pitt is good at stopping. You know what I mean? When they face good run offenses, whether it's Notre Dame or Florida State, they've done a good job keeping those rushing attacks pretty much under wraps. So I think they should do a good job against that. Hendon Hooker is scary. But I think it's really going to come down to that other side. And, if Pitt can find any success against, Virginia Tech, what, I guess, sort of strengths and weaknesses of that Virginia Tech defense. And we talked a little bit about the pass defense, but where are they vulnerable? Is it just the depth in the secondary there? Is that the biggest vulnerability, the biggest weakness there?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly the biggest one. Another one that has come into play at times, and again, because of players missing from the lineup earlier in the season, it may feel worse today than it is today because our opinions of it are colored by what we saw early in the year. But depth on the defensive line. They have a couple really good defensive linemen. Justice Reed, who's a kid who started his college career at Florida and then played 3 years at Youngstown State. He is now a 7th-year senior at Virginia Tech, is having a very productive year pass rushing from the end. Defensive tackle Jared Hewitt is having a nice year as well. But beyond those two, it's kind of been a rotating cast of characters at the other defensive tackle spot and the other defensive end spot. So if the Hokies get good production out of those two positions, which they have occasionally this year for entire games at times, and sometimes you get it for a flash here and there, then I think for the most part, things look a lot better. But there's always the chance that you don't get that sort of production that you're hoping for or expecting from those two positions. And that's been, I think it was a big part of why Liberty was able to run the ball really well against Virginia Tech. It's a big part of why Miami had a pretty nice game offensively, even though they weren't consistent in the passing game last week. So those are the things that I think Hokie fans kind of, again, that they're clutching at pearls each weekend as they see what was formerly the lunch pail D. I don't know if fans are ready to bestow that honor upon it anymore, but every time it takes the field, there's a little bit of worry there for sure.
Do the fans, anytime the other team gets a first down or, God forbid, a touchdown, do they say, oh, that wouldn't have happened with Bud? That wouldn't have happened when Bud fought? I mean, does that still get brought up and invoked? Or
it actually happens a lot less than I was expecting with a change at the coordinator position. Some of that is because I would say 2 of Bud's last 3 defenses were only okay. Now, they weren't terrible, but they were only okay. And so when the sheen comes off of that just a little bit, maybe the comparison now kind of, especially because those are the more recent years, doesn't look quite as negative. Right.
All right. Any other thoughts on this game, Tim? I mean, we covered kind of both sides of it. Is there anything else that stands out that we didn't touch on, you think?
Yeah, I think a big question that I have about Pitt is that it seems like, and I know this from Pat Narduzzi's time at Michigan State when I was covering Michigan, is they really like to load the box and stop the run, and that's such a huge priority. The pass defenses haven't been good for the Panthers for most of his tenure, but it seems like the last couple have really come around. Is that because of better talent? Is that because they've changed something that they like to do?
I think they did change defensive coordinators a couple years into it. You still have Pat Narduzzi kind of calling the shots.
Yeah.
Well, not calling the shots. They have a defensive coordinator calling the shots, but it's still Pat Narduzzi's team, and it's still a variation of his defense. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The priority is stopping the run, and they've always been very good at it. There've been very few teams that have, really been able to successfully run the ball against Pitt. But the pass defense, there have been a few things in the last couple of years. The talent in the secondary has gotten a lot better. And their pass rush has also really kind of come on, particularly in the last year or two. I think they were, one of the top 2 teams in the country last year in sacks. They're right up there again this year. They've got some outstanding defensive ends. Their defensive tackles get a good push up the middle. So it really is, it almost feels like a kind of feast or famine. There was a point where, over the run of like 3 games, I think Boston College, Miami, and Notre Dame, it was something like 11 or 14% of the opposing quarterback's dropbacks were all either sacks or 20-plus yard touchdown passes. I mean, it was really, they either got to the guy or gave up a long pass because, sometimes those corners get left out on an island, or a linebacker stuck against a slot receiver, or a, unfavorable matchup of a tight end and a safety. And they're able to take advantage of that if the pass rush doesn't get there. So, it's very much what it was at Michigan State. I feel like the game that we always reference is when Michigan State played Baylor in the Cotton Bowl in Narduzzi's last year there. And, I mean, Baylor just slaughtered them for their first 3 quarters, just up and down the field. They couldn't do anything to stop them. Michigan State rounded in form in the 4th quarter and won the game. But we've seen plenty of that over the last 6 years watching Pat Narduzzi's teams at Pitt, where they do get beat up. I mean, the classic was the 2016 game against Virginia Tech of just, fade pattern. And Narduzzi swore up and down that Virginia Tech was pushing off on every one of those passes, and he paid a sizable fine to the ACC for his comments after that game. But that's what it's been. It is a little bit of feast or famine, but like you said, though, it's all about stopping the run, which I think that makes this game really interesting. You know what I mean? Where you've got a run heavy offense against a defense that really prioritizes stopping the run.
Yeah. So it's going to be a matter of whether you get good Hendon Hooker or bad Hendon Hooker on a given play a lot of the time. I think the other big question that Hokie fans wonder is, since the Pitt run game has not been successful itself this year, is Kenny Pickett having an efficient year? Is he having a big play type of year? What sort of season is he having? I feel like everybody feels like they're so familiar with him, but they don't know what sort of Kenny Pickett you're going to get in a given year.
Yeah, and every year has been different for him. His first year as a starter in 2018, they had 2,000-yard rushers. So, I mean, they just ran the ball all the time, and they were really good at it. His next year in 2019, last season, they brought in Mark Whipple to improve the pass game, and he threw it a million times.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
With 3,000 yards, but he, threw it a ton. His yards per attempt, I think, was actually less than it was the previous season. So this year, Pickett has been his best. I think it's the best season that Kenny Pickett has had. I think he's 8 touchdowns and 3 picks, and he had to miss 2 games in there because he hurt his ankle at Boston College. He got back for the Florida State game this past week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And the difference was very noticeable compared to the previous 2 games. Now he's had an extra week to get healthy. He is efficient. He's dealt with drops. They're averaging about 3 drops per game, according to Pro Football Focus, which is a big problem. It was a big problem last year too. And you really get a sense of kind of where he stands, or where he even was last year. When you look at on Pro Football Focus, they have the adjusted completion percentage.
Yeah.
It takes into account the drops and throwaways and all that. He was like 15th in the country last year in adjusted completion percentage. He's in the top 20 again this year. So he's a good quarterback, not a perfect quarterback. He's got some mobility, so he can get out and run a little bit if the play breaks down. Quite frankly, it's probably something they could do a little bit more with him on designed runs. Mm-hmm. But their backups, it's a pretty considerable drop off right now. Yeah. So I don't know if they want to risk it with Kenny Pickett all that much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's, like I say, he's having his best season. I think he's a good player. It's just drops hurt him, and the lack of a running game has really kind of held him back. So
yeah,
but that's I mean, it'll come down to whether or not he can lead against this, because that was the thing last year. I always think about the game against Virginia Tech last year. It's 28-0, but it's not like the Hokies offense went up and down the field on Pitt.
Yeah,
they had, I feel like, less than 200 yards or something like that. They had one big play, and they scored a defensive touchdown, and really, I mean, that game was a slop fest all around.
Yeah, late in last year especially, the Hokies were very much in game management mode. Let's protect our defense a little bit. Let's slow the game down a lot, and that's something that, especially against the way Pitt was playing last year, which was a very fast pace, they definitely did not want to let that happen, and that led them to a run of success. And I think fans are probably hoping that they see a similar sort of run of success if they can get a handle on both sides of the ball at the same time this year too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It shouldn't rain nearly as much on Saturday as it did a year ago, which seems to happen the last like 4 or 5 times Pitt has gone to Blacksburg. I feel like it's back in 2015, I think it was Hurricane Joaquin almost rained the whole game out. So it's a bit of a mess. But all right, Tim, well, thanks so much for your time. And it was great to catch up with you as we do every year, and enjoy watching the game. I'll be, in the press box with a mask on, which is what we do. But we'll see what happens, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.